Good afternoon, patrons, and welcome to the April, not even remotely, 2019 Patroncast Part 2, the grand finale, Endgame. That's right, the Patroncast is back, and if you want to think about this in a really needlessly positive way, you can think about this as getting like 2 Patroncasts this month. Ooh, by which I mean like 2 Patroncasts like last month, but like, you know what I mean. Anyway, don't worry, this should just be a one-off thing. This was just an unfortunate series of things that all like happened in a row this last week or two. So everything should be back to how it should be next month. We should be back to, I was about to say everything being on time, but like, you know what I mean? Like everything being on time according to the timetable where everything's like deliberately late, but like only a bit late, like the normal amount of late, not late on top of late. So like, you know, right now it's as late as you're expecting, or rather like that's how it should be, but not later than that. It's like, you know, when you show up for a train, you kind of, you know, if it's a few minutes late, that's fine. But 10 minutes late, that's too much. Like, it's not going to be a 10-minute late train in future. It's just going to be a 2-minute late train, which is perfectly acceptable. Anyway, let's dive into the questions. Hopefully you found the Imperator discussion in the last part interesting. But now, time to get to what you lovely people have to say. John, what's your favourite American city? Easy one, actually. Seattle. I've always had a soft spot for Seattle. Not least as I actually know people that live in Seattle, so therefore I have been to visit it a few times, so I know it better than many other American cities. The climate is fairly European. In fact, it feels like a European city in many, many ways. And, you know, it's just got some lovely areas. Fremont's a nice neighbourhood. I like the coffee house culture. It's got a great aquarium. Pike Place Market is a really cool place just to hang out in. I like the fact it's got beaches and ocean, but also you've potentially got a good chance of snow in winter. It just feels like a lovely city. I really just like Seattle. If I had to live anywhere in the US, it would totally be in Seattle. Very nice city indeed. John, what's your favourite 8-bit or older video game? 8-bit's interesting actually. Hang on, which was 8-bit? I mean, I know 8-bit was the NES, but now I'm trying to remember what was also 8-bit, because the first console, there was like a home console that was actually mine, was a Super NES. Like before that, I had hand-me-downs. So I kind of skipped the 8-bit generation because in that time period, I had a Game Boy. So I kind of went from Game Boy to Super NES. And before that point, I inherited a ColecoVision that was just a hand-me-down from one of my siblings. So I can't remember how many bits the ColecoVision was. Was that before we even started measuring things in bits? Because there was like, you know, a very specific period when we measured things in bits. Like the NES, that was 8-bit. And then, you know, it was 16-bit on the Super NES. And then the PlayStation was 32-bit. Then the N64 was so 64-bit they put it in the title. And then everyone was aware that the Dreamcast was 128, but it wasn't a big deal. And then we just stopped counting bits. Like, was the PlayStation 256? Because it seems to just double every generation, and my assumption going forward in the N64 days was we'd just keep doubling the amount of bits forever, but then everyone stopped talking about bits, and I don't know what a bit is, and now I've said the word bit too many times and it doesn't sound right anymore. Anyway, if the Game Boy count, then obviously the original Pokemon games. Absolutely adore Pokemon Blue, which is the version that I actually had, together with Tetris and Super Mario Land 2, is epic. But if the Game Boy doesn't count, then Mousetrap, which was a variation on Pac-Man, back on the Coleco. Loved that, because yeah, it was like Pac-Man, except you actually had these coloured gates that you could open or close to provide different routes for you to escape or trap the cats that were following you because you were a mouse who was basically just trying to eat all the dots like Pac-Man. Basically it was Pac-Man, but better. Screw Pac-Man, Mousetrap was great. John, can we expect a video about Endgame similar to the one that you and Claire did about Infinity War? No, I wasn't actually planning to do one of those because I didn't really want like spoilers floating around to the channel, and by the time I'd feel comfortable doing it spoiler-wise, it would be, you know, quite a bit after the fact. So I thought the best way to do it was actually just to go on someone else's podcast, which I've done. So I've already been on the Moderate Fantasy Violence podcast to discuss Endgame at length, so if you want about 2 hours of me discussing Endgame, I will put a link to that down in the description of the Patroncast, and hopefully I will anyway. Normally this is the point where I'd say, Claire, remind me to do this, but Claire's away. Why is Claire away? Everything's much harder when Claire's not here. Claire does a lot of work for the channel and now I'm sad. But yes, hopefully I'll remember. If I don't, yell at me in the comments and I'll add it in. But if I do, check on Twitter because I definitely tweeted about it recently. What class would you play as if you were to do Elder Scrolls Online? Dragon Knight, Nightblade, Templar, Warden, Sorcerer? Oh, I don't know what any of these are. Ooh, Necromancer. Yes, that one. I love Necromancy because generally in games, if you've got the option to have an upgrade where you can just raise something friendly, even if it's not necessarily that good, I generally go for that anyway, because I find it very useful just to have another ally in the field, where if they die it doesn't matter, because even if they don't do much damage and can't take that much damage, they just distract, and it gives you a lot of freedom and space to back off, get yourself set up correctly, heal up, line up a good shot, whatever. So as a general rule, when the option becomes available to have a friend, I'll always go for a friend. And undead friends are obviously the best friends of all, so yeah, Necromancer for me, thanks. What's the weirdest challenge you've considered for a Fallout or Elder Scrolls game? The weirdest one that I've considered that I think actually might have legs is actually the no reloading challenge, where if you pick up a gun you're allowed to use it, but the moment its first clip runs dry, you actually have to drop it. Like, your character just has some form of terrible mental block that means they don't know how to reload guns and they can't figure out how to do it. So every gun is allowed to be used once, and only once, and then you have to drop it and go and get another gun. I always felt like that might be quite fun. I mean, not fun enough to actually get a full series out of. I think it would kind of run out of steam, but it might be fun as, like, you know, a brief one-off challenge run of some description for, like, a special event. I've always thought that one might at least have some legs. If you were able to have one thing from a game, what thing would you have and why? Growlithe. I've always wanted a Growlithe, because it's just a puppy, but it's also a fire type, so if you hug it, it would be really, really toasty. It's basically just a puppy that's bigger and toastier, so I just want a Growlithe, really. Just give me a Growlithe. John, what happens if you fail Fallout 4, you only live once? Will you give it another try in another season, or will you just leave it failed? It would depend how I failed it and how far through I was. Like, if I just died in a freak accident early on, I'd probably just restart it, but, like, do it in a different way, and then just kind of, you know, try and actually do more tight editing to get back to roughly where we were faster. If I kind of got really far in and it went horribly wrong, it would depend, like, whether there was a massive rethink to be done on tactics. Like, if I could completely redo the route to make it more sensible, I'd probably, like, restart it, maybe not immediately, but I could do, like, a really brief series between that and the next attempt, while I was just kind of doing the replanning. If, however, I already felt like the route was just pretty well optimised, but I just got a bit unlucky, and I just died, like, late in, at that point I'd probably draw a line under it and just say, this has been failed, but it was because I was unlucky. I could easily have won had luck gone a different way. So probably those are the options available. I mean, yeah, the real kind of problem would be if I were to die very close to the end, where I don't see an obvious way to reroute the whole thing. Because if you reroute the whole thing, it's a whole new experience. So at that point, it doesn't really matter that you're doing it again, because it's a whole new way of doing things. So, yeah, interesting one. Maybe I could actually add, like, you know, if I was redoing it, I'd actually add in more stringent rules to up the challenge a bit, to actually keep it interesting. I don't know, that's worth having a think about. John, do you have any plans on reusing the end card made specifically for the last episode of the first Total War Warhammer series? The best end card in the history of the channel. In case you've forgotten this, by the way, this was the episode where my computer crashed. I think it might have actually been a power cut, I can't remember now. But basically I lost the footage, had no way of getting it back, and because I'd been a bit sloppy with my save games, I couldn't actually go back to where I was at the end of the previous part. So that series just ended at, I think it was part 11. I think part 10 was the last numbered part, so part 11 was labelled Grand Finale. So therefore, I decided to just recreate what did happen during that play session before my computer died, just basically using various household objects. And the whole thing was pretty much ad-libbed, and it involved, just, you know, completely out of context, me spraying Emma Bunton's first album with ketchup and saying, screw you, Emma Bunton, because Emma Bunton represented the forces of chaos. It's an odd video, but weirdly it got way more views than loads of the previous parts of Total War Warhammer, because lots of people who hadn't even watched the series came in for that one, because it was just weird, and it kind of works as a standalone. It's a very odd video, but at the end of it, I also basically improvised the old LA Noire end card by literally drawing it and recreating it. I can't do it justice. Go and check it out if you've never seen it before. It's a very interesting video, and it's really not that long either. John, do you know Christopher Odd? You both play a ton of the same games, but have very different playstyles. I think if you did a collab, you could get something interesting out of it. I know the name, and I'm sure I've seen some of his stuff in the past. I don't believe we've ever communicated in any way, and I don't recall ever running into him at any events, as far as I remember anyway. So if I was to do, like, a collab with someone I've not actually done a proper collab with before at this point, I'm probably, like, got an eye on doing something with the Spiffing Brit at some point. Me and him have definitely been discussing that. So I will look into Christopher Odd. I don't know much about them. I know the channels are comparable size to ours, so they probably might be interested. But I'd need to figure out what it would be and how it might work. So I will look into it, but these things can be difficult to arrange. Collabs, they're very tricky. They're very tricky to pull together. So I can't promise anything there, but I will look into it. John, do you have any plans to do another board game mini-series like you did for Fallout the board game, with games such as Pandemic, Fall of Rome, or similar? Interesting question. Honestly, like, that was so difficult to pull together. Like, we needed to borrow a bunch of equipment and set it all up correctly, and it was a nightmare to actually pull together. The editing was a nightmare as well. It was so much faff, and I wasn't even happy with the end quality. To be honest, I don't think the end quality was really good enough. I didn't like that if I did more board games in future, it would be board games that have been ported to Steam. So we did Race to the Galaxy since then. That's actually a card game that Claire and I own the hard copy of, and we've played that before. So because I knew the game from that, that's why I made the video. Now, there have been a bunch of games that have moved over to Steam, like Ticket to Ride and Pandemic and Galaxy Truckers. They all have Steam versions, some of which are very well put together, some of which not so much. So if we did another board game, honestly, we'd probably do it that way. Because that's what we did with Carcassonne. That was me and Claire together. That's what I did with Race to the Galaxy. That was just me. What's another one, by the way? I swear there's another one we've done. But yeah, if we can do it on PC, it's probably easier that way. So if we do board games, it'll probably be like that. John, have you ever played a game that has all the things you like done in good ways, but you just couldn't get into it? Yes, actually, I think ultimately that's how I feel about Red Dead Redemption 2, which I think is a really good game. It's a brilliantly put together world, the voice acting's great, it looks amazing, it's great to just potter around the world, but the bit that makes it not work for me is the missions. I find them too linear and too restrictive, and just not really willing to reward creativity or exploration, so in the end, that's what kind of put me off continuing Red Dead Redemption 2. Even though while I'm just pottering around the world having a bit of fun with it, I had a really nice time, the thing that put me off is I just didn't want to do any more missions. And I knew until I did a large number of missions, I couldn't move the plot forward because the plot is gated behind those missions. So the world is basically fundamentally static until I do missions, but I didn't want to do any of the missions. I just wanted to go around, find my own fun, do my own stuff, and I have gone and done that. I've played the game a little bit since, but it's just me pottering around and exploring the world. It's not really anything that makes a good video because there's nothing to really commentate there. And I just didn't want to bother going to do a mission. Because, you know, I have to go all the way back to camp, and then I have to escort an NPC all the way to somewhere, and then need to do a very linear series of events, then need to ride all the way back, and diddly-diddly-dee over and over and over again. And I found that so uninteresting. I've never experienced this to quite such an extent, but Red Dead Redemption 2 is an incredible game engine, and an incredible world, but I'm just uninterested by the game that exists within that world, which is a real shame. And in some ways, I guess I feel the same way about Mass Effect Andromeda, which is, it's a big, interesting, and sometimes very beautiful world, but there's just nothing interesting going on. The missions the game give you just aren't interesting stuff, so that can be a big barrier for me sometimes. Games which I really should like, I just end up not being a big fan of, purely because the actual core gameplay of the missions isn't really what I'm interested in, which I think was the problem for Andromeda for me, it was the problem for Red Dead 2, and it's why I kind of lost interest in both of those games before the end. Ooh, the next question's going to expose me as an incredible cultural philistine. Marvellous. I've been asked to comment on my thoughts about the Lord of the Rings trilogy as a book versus the books behind A Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, I'm afraid I have to admit, I haven't actually read either of those books. And Game of Thrones, I haven't read the books or watched the TV series. So, literally the only thing I can contribute to this discussion is, yeah, Lord of the Rings films. They were pretty good. I enjoyed them. Yeah, they were pretty decent. So, unfortunately, I can't really contribute to that. So, I'm going to hand this one over to Claire. Though the question did specify me and Claire. So I'm going to leave this one to Claire to talk about Lord of the Rings versus Game of Thrones, influences, differences, diddly-diddly-dee. Because I'm sure I've heard Claire talk about this in the past, so I'm pretty sure Claire actually has opinions on this. Together with, on top of that, book recommendations from Claire for people who are fans of Stephen King and Neil Gaiman. Go, Claire, go!
Oh my goodness, do I have opinions about this? Capital O opinions. I've had to re-record this little bit like 3 or 4 times because I keep going way too long. So I will just start very quickly by saying that there is basically no work of modern Western epic fantasy that is not in some way like in conversation with Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings is so influential to the genre. And so basically, like, you can't read a work of modern epic fantasy set in kind of a pseudo-Western world and not see the ways in which it relates to the Lord of the Rings. Now, specifically for A Song of Ice and Fire, something I learned about really recently, which I found fascinating, is that it was actually written kind of directly in conversation with the Lord of the Rings, or at least like part of the idea for the story was directly in conversation with Lord of the Rings. George R. R. Martin said in an interview that someone pointed out to me recently that basically he was rereading Lord of the Rings, and there is a line at the end of Return of the King where it describes about 150 years of Aragorn's reign as King of Gondor at the end of the book, after all the adventures are done, in one line. And it says, you know, Aragorn reigned wisely and justly. And George R. R. Martin is sitting there going like, what does this mean? What does it look like day to day? And that basically, like, for him, the idea of wanting to dig down more specifically into what it looks like to govern a medieval fantasy world kind of came from the way in which, in this foundational text of our genre, like, it was just kind of a throwaway line. I don't know, I just learned about this recently and I thought I'd share it because I find it fascinating. And now, book recommendations for fans of Stephen King and Neil Gaiman. I don't read a ton of horror, but I do have some deliciously creepy reads to recommend. The Murders of Molly Southbourne by Stade Thompson, which is about a girl who has like murderous clones of herself that keep popping up all around her, and she has to like defend herself. It's a really creepy read that I keep thinking about even though it's been months. The Changeling by Victor Laval is about like the kind of myth of the changeling, where like a baby gets swapped for a creepy dangerous fairy thing, and it's about the dad trying to figure out what is going on, and it's again super creepy. If you fancy vampires that are extremely violent, bloody and gory, there is Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which is about like Mexican vampires. There's some really cool mythology that goes behind all the different types of vampires, and I really enjoyed it. I'd also recommend the comic book series Lock and Key, which is written by Joe Hill, who is Stephen King's son, and it's about this like big house that someone inherits after there is a murder in their family, and in the house there are many doors, and all those doors have magic keys that do creepy, terrifying, surreal things. The art, I can't remember the artist, but it's really beautiful, and also like, did I say it was creepy? Because it's really creepy.
It seems like a long time since the jaunty Irish music and other royalty-free music has been on the channel. Is that due to changing how you edit videos? No, actually. It's due to a very positive change in the video game industry in general, which is the reason we had to use the jaunty Irish music a lot back in the day is because video games used to very freely use third-party music and not really care about YouTubers and whatever. But in recent years, there's been a big change, which is more and more publishers actually add into their games options to disable third-party music. So say in Life of Strange, where they use a lot of third-party music, there's actually options in the audio settings where you can say, if this is third-party music that you don't have the rights to put on YouTube, please disable that track automatically, which therefore I always turn on. And in the old days, we'd have had to put the jaunty Irish music over the top of that third-party music, which I'm pretty sure we actually did do in one of the early episodes of the original Life is Strange. But in more recent Life is Strange games, we can just disable that music with the settings, therefore we don't need it anymore. So it's not really a change in editing style, it's actually a change in the way games are made, which is very convenient for YouTubers. How do you feel about folks who listen to your videos to fall asleep? Honestly, it doesn't really bother me one way or the other. Like, it's not something I look at and think, that's amazing, or that's terrible, I really wish people wouldn't do that weird, creepy thing. It's pure neutral zone territory. Call my wife and tell her I said hello. But yeah, if it works for you, great. Honestly, I'm slightly surprised you'd actually pick me for that, because I'm not sure my videos are the quietest. Like, there are many YouTubers out there who have a much more kind of, subdued, relaxing voice where they're just kind of playing the game and it's super chill and diddly-diddly-dee. Like, we're a lot more effusive at times. Like, sometimes things go wrong. It's, oh no, a thing's exploding and now everything's on fire. Oh, everything's going fine. I'm a genius at this game. Oh no, I'm on fire again. So there's a lot of variety and volume. So I'm kind of surprised you'd go to us for that, but if it works for you, then more power to you. Do you think you've learned any valuable lessons that could provide insights into Fallout 4 You Only Live Once from your previous You Only Live Once runs? In all fairness, kind of no, just because Fallout 4 is so radically different. It's going to require a complete rethink, between radiation and the way damage is calculated and the way enemy spawns work and the way that the map is laid out. Fallout 4 is so radically different to Fallout 3 in New Vegas, it's going to need a total rethink. So in many ways, I think I'm going to be better served by totally ignoring any of the lessons of Fallout 3 in New Vegas and just starting planning completely from nothing. I think that's actually going to work better for me. If you could rule any country in the world, which one would it be? I'd say Canada, just because Canada seems like it's pretty chill. It just feels to me like, Canada's probably the most chilled out country to rule. It just seems to be pretty calm. Nothing ever goes too badly wrong there. You just, chill out, keep the boat steady, and people are probably going to be pretty happy with you, which is absolutely lovely. But in terms of, one policy I would push to make sure this place is the best it could possibly be, I would massively invest in preventative healthcare. Because the thing is, treating and curing diseases once they've already kind of set in and become serious, that's really, really, really expensive. But if you can actually prevent things before they kick off, it's often a lot cheaper to treat, and also you get much better results. And yet, huge amounts of money are spent in healthcare systems around the world on actual healthcare for people who are already sick, yet very small amounts are set aside for preventative healthcare. And that can be things as simple as just encouraging good health in citizens of that country by, say, providing extremely good quality leisure centres with free gyms so everyone has a good opportunity to exercise regularly, subsidising extremely healthy food, public information campaigns and classes to help people learn how to cook better so people know how to prepare healthy food. This is the sort of thing which mysteriously doesn't seem able to get much in the way of public money, and yet I think if you did invest in that, you'd probably save vastly more than it would cost in terms of healthcare savings. But whatever, it just seems to be a thing that doesn't happen. I've no idea why. John, I'm really enjoying the Barbarian Invasion series, and I loved your Rome Total War series too. Why do you think Rome Total War makes such good YouTube series? Interesting question, and I think part of the reason is Rome Total War is very open-ended, which is pretty much the game doesn't give you much structure that you're supposed to be going down. It simply says, okay, here's a tech tree for buildings, here's a tech tree for units, here's a map, go conquer it. And as a result of that, the game's not really providing you with any form of narrative or structure, and that leaves the door open for me to basically provide my own narrative and structure. So therefore, getting to know the generals and doing a bit of roleplay with those characters, any of the ones that catch my fancy, that kind of fills that gap. And I think I'm quite good at that sort of thing, so therefore the series worked really well. But as you go forward in time into later Total War games, there's more and more structure put in. So for example, in Warhammer, the moment you begin, you're given a very clear mission. The game says, hey, go and do this. Right, now go and do this other thing. And oh no, this faction's done a bad thing. Go to this quest battle where the enemy will have certain predetermined armies and then beat them for this quest reward, and then you'll have a special sword or a book or whatever that you can give to your legendary lord and diddly-diddly-dee. And the whole thing's a lot more structured. And because it's structured and the context is being provided by the game, there's not space for me to provide the context myself, so therefore you just kind of go along with it and you don't roleplay as much, which I think makes them a bit less interesting to some people. That's just my theory anyway, but I'm not sure if that's 100% true. Speaking of Barbarian Invasion, I particularly like how much drama has occurred around it Quincum because I've actually visited the site and so get a bit excited by its appearance. Have you visited there yourself? I haven't actually. It's in modern-day Hungary, I believe. The problem is, I'm actually very badly travelled, because I don't really enjoy travelling. I'm very content just kind of being at home or doing, like, small little local vacations around the UK. I'm not much of a traveller, to be honest. So, in terms of the Roman sites that are featured in the Total War games that I myself have visited, I visited, I think pretty much all of them in Italy and Greece, because I have visited Italy and Greece many times in the past, mainly to see sites of archaeological interest. Any further afield than that? Honestly, for the most part, no. I've seen many sites in Britain and some in France as well, though. I should actually add on to that. But, yeah. Other than that, not so much. The actual border towns of the Roman Empire, I've actually visited very few of them myself, just because I'm not really much of a traveller. Finally, I was really interested by your discussion about Greek identity in the Imperator Rome series, and I was curious, do you think the Greeks were united before the Persian Wars? I think, as I was kind of trying to hint at during the Imperator series, there was certainly an idea. There was definitely a pan-Hellenic idea of Greeks having a lot more in common than they have that separates them. But as very often happens in history, it takes a large external threat that is distinctly more alien than the guy standing next to you to bring everybody together. So in some ways I think the Persian Wars were probably very useful in galvanising the idea of a Greek identity and galvanising the idea that Greeks had to bond together when external threats emerged. That didn't mean that there was a massive sea change at that point, and thereafter Greeks were all just, happy allied together. Very soon after all of the Persian Wars, Greeks were straight back to stabbing each other in the face. But I do think the presence of the great king of Persia and the constant threat that he posed absolutely was a big factor in Greek thought when it came to, hey, us Hellenic sorts probably ought to stick together when we have to. When cooking at home, do you tend to make a lot of food at once so you can enjoy leftovers and not cook as often, or do you cook smaller amounts and cook more often? We don't often have much in the way of leftovers. If there's any small amount of leftovers at ours, often Claire will just have those for lunch the following day. I'm not so keen on leftovers in general, so Claire will often have those for lunch and I'll go out and get something fresh for myself, because Claire's very happy with just kind of putting some stuff in the microwave and she really likes leftovers the next day. I'm not so keen on that as an idea, so generally we don't make a huge amount of leftovers, but if there are a few, Claire often opts into having those for lunch. John, when you did some test runs for Crusader Kings 2, were there any interesting stories that came out of those runs? Not that I can remember, but one thing did stand out to me, which is, I don't think I saw William the Conqueror actually become William the Conqueror at any point during any playthrough. He always seems to lose. I've seen Harold Hardrada win a few times. I've seen England fight off both invaders a couple of times. I've never actually seen William the Conqueror win, which feels odd to me, given that's what historically happened. If you had the ability to push a new Fallout game into any direction you wanted, what would you want it to be? Now, one of the suggestions that was actually put in the question was XCOM, a small-scale tactics game, and I think that would actually work really well. I would absolutely love Fallout to get back to being a strategy turn-based RPG, but with a lot of modern polish to it. I think that'd be really, really interesting. And the success and interest in XCOM and Phoenix Point, I think, shows there is still an interest in that sort of thing, and if you were to put a big license behind it, I think it could be something very worth doing. I can see why they wouldn't do it for Fallout 5, but they generally do seem to like doing the odd spin-off for every main entry in the Fallout series, so I'm really hoping that after Fallout 5 proper, we might well get a spin-off that goes down that sort of a direction just to test the waters, see if there's any interest. And as for who should do it, well, I can't really say anyone other than Obsidian, purely because Obsidian still possesses some of the most talented individuals who are involved with Black Isle, who clearly do understand what makes a great Fallout game, so I couldn't give it to anybody else, really. Good day, John. What do you think would make an excellent setting for the next Total War Saga game? I've said it before and I'll say it again. I would love to see a World War I Total War game. I think it would be really interesting because we've never really seen trench warfare before in a Total War game. Obviously, we've never had tanks before because it's never come that far forward in time. I think it would be a really interesting experiment. And as the Saga games are supposed to be about taking risks and doing weird experiments, I think it would be a really interesting place to do it. Maybe don't do it all about just the entirety of World War I, because you might want to use this to test the waters, and then if it went well, do a full Total War World War I down the line. So maybe find, a small theatre of war in one of the world wars and just kind of do it there. But I feel like World War I would definitely be the better option, because then you've got the option of bringing in some modern tech, the very first tanks, for example. But if you did World War II, you'd already have loads of tanks and you'd have air forces and all sorts of bits and pieces. So I feel like you'd definitely be better off doing World War I, but maybe pick a small theatre of World War I, try that out. If it works well, do a major World War I proper Total War game. And I think that will be a really good use for the Saga games as a testing ground for new ideas. Will the new series slot that's been introduced for Imperator Rome be a permanent thing? It'll be a permanent thing for now. I introduced it at this exact moment in time because pretty much at the moment when Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion ends, we're actually going to get 3 kingdoms. So as a result of that, I'm kind of thinking that Imperator will just stay where it is, and then Barbarian Invasion rolls into 3 kingdoms, and then when 3 kingdoms or Imperator ends, I don't know which will end first, then at that point we probably revisit and figure out what to do with the schedule and what we're going to do at that point. So I don't know, basically. It's going to be sticking around for the time being, though, yes. Another mention of another YouTuber. Do you know Mike Burnfire? Indeed I do. Not well and not personally. But actually, not only do I know him, he's actually been on the channel before. I'm not sure if you'd remember, but in the Darwin project, Mike Burnfire was one of the competitors. So Mike Burnfire has actually been featured on Many a True Nerd at one point. Ah, yes, and a question I've seen pop up in a few different places about Imperator, not about my experience with Imperator putting together the tutorials, but yeah, about the response to Imperator, which I find very interesting, which is, actually, I find it really interesting how some people have phrased the question, because some people have actually kind of, sent me messages on Twitter or whatever, saying like, John, what are your thoughts about how terrible the response to Imperator has been, all the terrible reviews and the massive backlash, and thinking, what? Are you saying something different to me? Because it seems to have actually had a really positive critical response. Not an amazing one, but pretty damn positive. And in terms of user reviews on Steam and Metacritic, it seems to be mixed at the minute. So I'm not really sure where you're getting this terrible backlash, it's terrible and everyone hates it thing from, but whatever. But yeah, in terms of the mixed reviews it's been getting from users, I'm not too surprised in some ways. Maybe I would have expected positive, not very positive, not mixed, just in the middle on positive. But you know what? It's a Paradox game. I go into this expecting it to be a really interesting, really deep foundation that could potentially have a lot added onto it. And I kind of compare it in my mind to Stellaris, because Stellaris, in its original 1.0 form, which I played just after it came out, I had a really great time with that. In fact, I had such a great time with it, I went back and played it some more, and I had a really great time with it. I really enjoyed the Mighty Duck playthrough. But now, if you look back at how Stellaris was in those days, based on how it is today after the 2.0 and 2.2 updates, it seems so basic it's almost ridiculous. And you can choose to interpret that how you want, I suppose, because some people see this as a very negative thing. So they say, oh, they've released an unfinished game and they're going to be selling DLC for it for years. And generally I look at it and say, okay, the game's not perfect. If you compare, say, Imperator, how it is right now just after launch, to Crusader Kings 2, how it is with 27 DLC packs installed, yeah, the Imperator experience is going to be a lot thinner, but that's not really a fair comparison, is it? And I'm not hugely bothered by the DLC argument in general, because Paradox are also very good at providing free updates, which is if you bought the Stellaris base game and then you never bought DLC again, you would still have got huge amounts of free updates, because every time they release a big DLC pack, they provide a free update at the same time. And they also provide free updates just on a regular basis anyway, so even if you've never bought DLC, Stellaris in its 2.2 form is much bigger, much more fleshed out, loads more to do than there was in it at launch, including 2 major mechanical reworks of core systems. So Paradox, I think, provides you with really good value for money. Even if you don't want to buy the DLC, you can be confident you're going to keep getting free updates for years into the future. Like Crusader Kings 2 just got its Wonders update, adding in, like, Ancient Wonders of the World and cathedrals and all sorts of big things you can build. And that was just free to everyone. They weren't charging for that. If you've ever bought Crusader Kings 2 and it goes on sale regularly, you just get that for free, which is another reason I think Paradox games are actually really good value, because they do sales all the time because they know they make good money on the DLC. So you can often pick up the base game really cheap not long after launch, and then if you just don't want to buy the DLC, you will keep getting those updates for years and years and years into the future. So you absolutely can argue both sides, and if you want to, you can say Paradox is a terrible ripoff, and if you want to, you can say Paradox is incredibly good value, depending on how you look at it. I personally like the way it's done, and in terms of Imperator specifically, I think the state that Imperator is in at launch is actually pretty solid. Absolutely, it's bare bones in some ways, and in terms of politics and subterfuge and stuff to do in peace, there needs to be a lot more. But as a war game, it works really well. The trade system's really solid. Wars themselves are really fun and interesting. There's a lot there that actually works. It's a really solid foundation. And I think there's a lot more there than there was in Stellaris 1.0. And when I consider how far Stellaris has come from 1.0 to 2.2, I just look at Imperator 1.0 and I think, oh my god, how good is it going to be in a year and 2 years and 3 years? It's going to be incredible. Because I'm having a fun time with it anyway. Absolutely, I agree, it needs some rework, it needs some rebalancing. And in particular, there needs to be more stuff to do other than just being constantly at war. But I think for a game that's clearly built around the idea of regularly being at war and everything being settled in a big scrap, the war system actually works pretty well. So they have done a good job nailing one of the core systems. So honestly, I don't have a massive problem with it, to be honest, and I'm surprised it ended up with mixed reviews on Steam. If only because I'm surprised so many people who bought it weren't expecting it to be broadly what it is, because this is just how Paradox does things. And you may like it and you may not, and as I say, some people don't like it, I personally do, but it's how they do things, so you must have known that this was how it was going to be going into it, right? So, I don't know. Personally, I'm a little bit surprised by the number of negative reviews, but how Paradox does things, it works for me, and I think Imperator is a really strong foundation to build on. John, which barbarian horde would you say is the worst in Barbarian Invasion, or are they all pretty much the same? It's very hard to say because many of them are pretty much duplicates of each other. Like, say, the Vandals and the Slavs are pretty much identical, the Roxolani and the Sarmatians are identical, Burgundy and Lombardy are completely identical. There are so many duplicates that are just recolours of each other, it's kind of hard to say that one is the worst. In fact, if anything, I'd say one stands out more than the others in terms of the best one. That's the Frankish Horde. Those guys have got some really solid units in them. So that one probably stands at the top together with the Huns, but other than that, they're all kind of a muchness, to be honest. John, are there any games that you enjoy watching someone else play that you don't play yourself? Yes, StarCraft at a high level. I really enjoy watching pro-level StarCraft, but I am terrible at StarCraft. I'm so terrible. Like, you know, proper Gold League level of terrible. Once I was accidentally put into Diamond 1v1 back in the Wings of Liberty days, but I was immediately kicked back out again because basically I just got really lucky in some placement matches one season. So I'm really bad at StarCraft, absolutely dreadful at it, but I do enjoy watching people who are really skilled. Fuck, marry, kill, PG Tips, Marks and Spencer's linen clothing. Oh, that's a tough one. Right, so I'm going to need to kill PG Tips. Because I don't drink as much tea as I used to. I only actually drink 1 cup of tea a day. Because I like sugar in my tea and I realised that was a lot of sugar. So rather than actually cut the sugar out of the tea, I just reduced the amount of tea. So I only actually have 1 cup of tea a day. So therefore, yeah, the PG Tips has a relatively small impact on my life. So we'll get rid of that. In which case, marry Marks and Spencer's or... Ooh. Yeah, it has to be marry Marks and Spencer's. Because I love Marks and Spencer's. And there are plenty of comfortable clothes that aren't linen. So we'll marry them and then we'll fuck linen clothing because that just sounds like that will be a soft, lovely, enjoyable experience, really. John, I keep putting off watching any of your New Vegas videos because I've never played the game myself. Should I just cave and watch them? It might be a while before I get the chance to play the game. This is an interesting one because, like, if I had a machine that could erase one game from my memory so I could enjoy it again for the first time fresh, it would be New Vegas for me. Like, it's such a wonderful game, but, like, I know everything about it. I've played it to death. So at this point, I don't even know what I'd do in New Vegas at this point. If I was to do another series, I've no idea what's left for me at this point. I've played so much of it. I would love to be able to play it with fresh eyes. So I'd probably say don't watch my videos. Wait, it's a wonderful experience. Just enjoy it for yourself. But if you wanted to dip your toe in the water, maybe go for the New Vegas Survival J Sawyer mod playthrough, because that's kind of like a show off everything, 100% fun way to show off the game that goes through it step by step. So as a result of that, you could watch, say, the first episode or two of that and see how you feel about proceeding, because that'll actually be kind of like going through the areas one by one, going into detail about, like, you know, why an area is as it is, what makes it fun, what makes it interesting, all the fun stuff you might not normally know. Yeah, that's probably a good place to start right there. John, following on from the Imperator Rome tutorials, is there any chance you could do tutorial-style videos for Crusader Kings 2? I wouldn't dare, because I feel like I still don't know the game well enough, so it's not really my place. There are plenty of tutorials out there already that are probably very, very good indeed. Not Paradox's own. Paradox are famously not great at doing their own tutorials, which is why they paid me to do Imperators for them. And I did the best job I could with Imperator, but I just feel like Crusader Kings 2, because of the amount of DLC that exists, I probably don't know it well enough to actually do that justice, because it's been out for so long at this point. There are people who've put thousands of hours into that game. I can't tell them how to play the game better than they already know, so I feel like I wouldn't be the right person to do that. Like, Imperator, fine, literally no one outside of Paradox had played the game, so they just needed to find someone they liked, who they felt would be able to get to grips with the basics fast enough to make the tutorials, which I was in a position to do, but Crusader Kings 2, there would be more qualified people than me to do that. In Fallout 4 No Guns, I noticed that Bacon chooses to rescue and adopt Sean Synth from the Institute. Do you think Bacon would take an active role in being a mother to Sean, and if so, would she be a good parent? I think Bacon would think she was being a good parent. She'd occasionally decide to go out on a massive expedition, and she'd take Sean with her to teach him about the world, and he'd come back 5 days later shivering and covered in blood. And Bacon would think she did an absolutely magnificent job, and eventually Preston Garth and the other companions would just quietly take over the parenting and not really let Bacon get involved anymore, which she'd probably be fine with because she'd probably find something else to distract her 2 minutes down the road. John, have you ever played any D&D, and if so, what, who, how was your character? I never have. I've never actually done any D&D whatsoever. I would like to do it in some way. I just don't really know where to begin, to be honest, because I think it would be a really fun video series for me to actually somehow record, like, you know, my very first D&D experience. I just don't know who to do it with, how to record it, all that stuff. So it's something I'd like to do, but I don't really have an idea in mind how I'd make it happen. With a handful of exceptions, it feels like almost all classical history games out there are strategy games of some sort. Do you think there's a good reason for this? If I had my cynical hat on, I'd say it's because the people who are interested in classical history are massive nerds, and those same nerds are really into strategy games. So that's why that shook out the way it did. I don't know if that's true, but I have a feeling it might be. Do you think there are any good opportunities for classical period games in other genres? Sure, I see absolutely no reason why not, it's just that they generally haven't been massively successful. I mean, Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a really good example of how to do it really well. Rise, Son of Rome, not so much. John, your FTL series made me notice and eventually subscribe to your channel a few years ago. Any chance of more FTL? I do occasionally enjoy doing it as a live stream. It is traditional for me to do a live stream of FTL around my birthday in August, so yeah, we should have one coming up very soon, if nothing else. John, have you heard of an author named Anthony Riches? He's written 2 book series set in the Roman Empire. The book series called Empire and Centurion. You might like them, they've got plenty of historical background. He's done a lot of research for the books. I am not familiar with them myself. I will look into them after I'm done recording the Patroncast. John, why do you pronounce Triarii with an I sound at the end, but Denarii with an E sound at the end? Because I'm a massive inconsistent scrub who pronounces things in the way that most easily rolls off the tongue. There is absolutely no linguistic reason why Triarii should have an I sound and Denarii should have an E sound. Absolutely, I'm just being inconsistent because Triarii and Denarii roll off the tongue a bit more easily for me. So basically I'm just a massive scrub who pronounces things however's easiest. John, would you consider playing more puzzle or thinky games like Barbarous You or Heaven's Vault? I do enjoy them, and I think I've actually been bringing more of them into the schedule recently, so hopefully you've been pleased with that sort of thing, because there's definitely been more of that sort of thing around recently than there has been in the past, so I feel like we're already at a historical high for puzzle games, so hopefully that's good for you. John, I'm off to Seattle for 2 weeks in October, and I was sad to learn that Tully shut down last year. What? No! Boo! Boo, I say! Cancel the trip to Seattle. Don't. Alright, just don't go. Alright? I wouldn't bother. Now there's no Tullys, why would you actually go to Seattle anymore? Burn the whole city to the ground, nuke it, salt the earth. Alternatively, go to the aquarium, see if that massive octopus is still there, and see if the sea otters are still there, just floating around holding hands while asleep on the water, because they're adorable. John, what were the first world problems of the ancient Romans? Really interesting question, and actually there's a really good answer, which is, the first world problem of the ancient Romans is, our empire's just too big. We've just conquered too much territory. We're just too damn good at conquering. God, what a problem. And it really was. It sounds like a ridiculous first world problem, but it absolutely was the case. They had so much territory that they had too many borders to guard, and they couldn't actually secure all of those borders, which caused a lot of problems for them down the line. That's the downside of a massive empire. You've got more land to defend, and defending that territory can be extremely expensive, potentially costing more than you're actually making off the land you've just acquired, which indeed seemed to be the case for large parts of the Roman Empire, which honestly just financially weren't worth bothering with, which ultimately is why Caesar invaded Britain and then sort of pulled back out again, and Claudius had to do it again later, because Caesar basically just ran the numbers and said, hang on, Britain's not worth occupying, it's going to cost us more to hold this place than we're going to make by holding it, so everybody back on the boats, we're going home. And this arithmetic was something that the Roman Empire sort of failed to do, because part of being an emperor was being a massively successful military leader who went out there and secured new territory and expanded the Roman Empire and brought in money and slaves and loot from the conquest, and yay, that's for a triumph, without considering, hey, it's actually going to cost us way more than that to actually maintain and defend this territory. So yeah, the first world problem of ancient Rome at its core was basically, we're just too good at conquering things. John, when you were in America, what was your favourite local dish? You guys do good breakfast, alright? You guys know how to do breakfast. Wherever I went, pancakes stacked up as high as you like, waffles everywhere, drown it in syrup, slap bacon on the top of it. You guys know how to do breakfast. Well done. John, are you aware that cyclones is a legitimate English word pronounced cyclones and meaning a tropical storm? It was just that in your Look at Heaven's Vault, you repeatedly pronounced it as cyclones and provided a derivation from the Greek island group, which, while interesting, was totally wrong. The thing is, I was really confused by that when I first saw it, because I saw the word cyclones, but then I thought, hang on, the way that this word is being used in the game, it's describing not the actual storms themselves, it's being used to describe the island within the storm. So maybe it's not cyclones, maybe it's the cyclones as the islands, and oh yes, this is a game about Bronze Age languages, so I bet it's a reference to the Cyclades. And it probably wasn't. It probably was just supposed to be pronounced cyclones, but I convinced myself that it was the cyclones as a reference to the Cyclades. Looking back, yes, you know what? My original reading of, oh yeah, it's cyclones because there's cyclones around them, that probably would have made more sense, yes. John, what's a rough percentage breakdown of what you do during your working hours? How much time is spent recording, editing, doing thumbnails, researching new games, emailing devs, playing new games, all of that good stuff? Okay, interesting stuff, because of course, stuff is split between me and Claire, which is an average video can be recorded from anything between 1 and 4 hours. Probably about 2.5 is about the average. So the average video you see, 2.5 hours of base recorded footage. Then it needs to be edited, but it depends who's editing it. Because if I edit it, it happens a bit faster. Not because I'm some massively talented superhuman Superman, though I totally am, but purely because having played it, I know ahead of time what I think the video should look like, so I can cut bits out before I even get to them, because I know for a fact, oh yeah, that's a bit I'm not going to include, I'm just going to cut straight from this bit to the next bit. Whereas if I give it over to Claire to edit, she doesn't know that, so she needs to watch the whole thing and figure out if I, at any point start repeating myself, and thus blatantly I'm starting a section over again, so just take a bit out, close tab, diddly diddly dee. So it's going to take a bit longer for Claire to do something than it's going to take for me to do something. But editing it is going to take on average, at the bare minimum, the same amount of time as it took to actually record, unless for some reason the game happens to have massive gaps in it. Like say it's a city builder where I say, okay, I'm going to do this now, and then I spend the next 15 minutes doing it, and then, the next thing you see as the viewer is, right, so I've built this now, because then you can just see, oh, there's a massive 15-minute gap, we can cut that out and close that up really easily. So then you might be able to edit it faster than it takes to record, but normally most videos aren't like that. So say 2.5 hours of footage means it's going to take 2.5 hours minimum to actually edit. And then you've got to make sure it actually flows correctly. So I'll do what I just call a transition check, which is I don't watch the whole thing through, but I will actually kind of skim through any time I've made a cut, just to make sure the cut is nice and smooth, and actually sounds right, there's enough space between the end of one sentence and the beginning of the next, it looks correct, it's not like a jarring cut for any reason, so I just make sure that happens. Then it needs to render, which because my computer's pretty good, is pretty fast, I can just do that while I'm eating or doing something else. Uploading happens overnight. Thumbnails, Claire will do those, and those are a lot better than they used to be because Claire started doing those. So, Claire puts some real effort into that sort of thing. Researching new games is overwhelmingly Claire. Very often I'll just see some stuff dotted around that I kind of just get emailed about, and I'll discover it that way. But if we find something that we weren't emailed about, that's Claire's doing. She does a very good job doing that sort of business, and it's not a good job, that, because there's a lot of trash on Steam. They release a lot of really bad games on Steam, and Claire sees all of them, so pity poor Claire, because I don't think she enjoys that bit of the job at all. But yeah, the biggest thing unquestionably is editing. Editing is a huge part of mine and Claire's combined time. Claire in particular spends a lot of time editing. I don't spend as much time editing as I used to, because Claire's got better and better at editing, so therefore I can give more and more stuff over to her. But the biggest, most complex edits for complicated one-offs, I tend to do myself. in general, Claire gets series and one-offs that are a bit easier to put together. Like, if there's a bunch of jump cut related jokes where there's a lot of comedy that comes exclusively out of how it's edited together, there's a good chance I've done that. But say things like city builders, puzzle games, strategic stuff, Claire tends to get that sort of thing. So I probably spend more time recording than I do editing these days. But editing still takes up a lot of time. It's definitely the biggest time sink for me and Claire combined. John, are there any plans for a second Crusader Kings 2 series? Yes, actually. I think after we're done with Imperator and Three Kingdoms, that would probably be a good time for a new Crusader Kings 2 series, because they've added a bunch of stuff into it. There's been Holy Fury, there's been the new update with all the Great Wonders and whatever, and I would like to go back and play a more political game where I'm within a larger empire. So I'm feeling like, starting as the tiniest of the lowdown counts somewhere in the Byzantine Empire, that could be very fun indeed. Last Patroncast before the channel's birthday, so happy birthday, MATN. Aw, thank you. It's going to be a good birthday, I'm sure. I'm looking forward to... yeah, the channel anniversary videos. Claire loves those. I always break something. Any chance we'll be seeing any more of House Flipper, City Skylines, or Parkitect in the near future? House Flipper, yes, because Garden Flipper is nearly out, and as soon as I get my hands on that, oh, there are going to be videos, live streams, or both. Absolutely. Will you be considering doing more sponsored content if the stars align again, like the Imperator tutorial? Never say never, but I don't really have any plans to go hunting it out, to be honest. Like, if anyone approaches me, like, say, Paradox again, or, people I've done work with in the past where I like their games and whatever, like, say, if Creative Assembly approached me, I'd be open to considering it, but it's not something I'm going to be seeking out. I don't see it as a big thing in the future of the channel, and I definitely don't see us ever moving outside of the space of, saying, doing a video on a particular game. Like, say, in vlog space right now, there's so many people who are sponsored by, like, Squarespace or Skillshare. We're definitely not going to be moving into that sort of a direction. Between the Imperator live streams, the tutorials, the April Fool's special, and the Fallout mega video, the past month seem to have had the largest volume of specials I can remember. Yes, they have, which is why we've ended up horribly behind and really tired and working late into the night, and I probably ended up just exhausting myself so much I made myself slightly ill. So that's why we've had a bit of a quieter week this last week, where we had, like, just a single episode of Barbarian Invasion on Thursday. We moved the Imperator to Friday. Yeah, I've just been trying to catch up because we've just fallen massively behind because I took on way too many specials. And I probably shouldn't have done the Imperator stuff just because we were already a bit behind, but we did, and it was fun, and it's been good for the channel, so what have you. But, yeah, there's been a bit too much. I've taken on too many big projects over the past couple of months, so we're going to try and ease off on that just for the minute. I mean, to answer the specific question, I love the specials. They're really good, they're fun to put together, they're really interesting, they're good for the channel, but they eat so much time, I can't do them on a regular basis without basically scrapping the idea of daily videos. If I was to go down to a certain number of videos a week, at that point I could do more big, heavily edited specials, but it is just physically impossible, even with a team of two, with me and Claire, to do videos every day and also regular big high-effort specials. It just doesn't work. I mean, like if you look at, say, Up Is Not Jump and how regularly he produces content, stuff that's really high-effort stuff where it's been properly scripted, huge amount of production work has to go into it, that's as regular as he can make videos, and he does a really good job with that business. We would not be able to do daily videos if we tried to do that sort of thing. And the problem is, that would probably actually get us more attention and we'd probably gain more subs, but the number of views might actually go down because we make a lot of our views off our long-running series. So it's a difficult balance to strike. I'd like to be in a position where we could do a few more specials, but at this exact moment in time, we need to ease off on them for a month or two, just for the sake of getting back to a healthy place where me and Claire aren't stressing ourselves out. I've stopped hearing so much news about Brexit recently. Have things stalled, or has it devolved into a state of perpetual confusion? Perpetual confusion is possibly the best description I've ever seen. Honestly, we don't know what's happening. Maybe they'll fudge something together this month. We might postpone till October. When October rolls around, we might postpone again, or we might not. The reason you haven't heard as much is just because nobody knows what's happening anymore. Like previously, we had a ticking clock. There was supposed to be a date where we made a decision by, but now we've sort of kicked the decision into long grass, which is why there's less chatter about it, because nobody knows what or when we're counting down to anymore. Well, we already didn't know what we were counting down to. Now we don't know when we're counting down to either, so that makes it quite difficult to keep up a rolling news cycle. I have a lingering question from the last Christmas special. Did you ever learn about the importance of disk redundancy for data storage and buy an NAS? No. I mean, I asked some people who knew what they were talking about to explain an NAS to me, because I think I said to you guys at one point, that just sounds like a hard drive with two cables coming out of it so you can plug it into two computers. And we said, no, it's much more complicated than that. So I spoke to some people who I know who are really tech savvy, and they said, yeah, actually, that's pretty much it. So at some point we might set that up, but I don't know precisely when. John, do you have any plans for another Elder Scrolls run in the future? It really depends on what the timescale for Elder Scrolls 6 is, because if that's a very long way in the future, we might well be able to squeeze an Oblivion or a Morrowind playthrough in before it comes out. If it's surprisingly soon, then I'm not sure there'll be the chance to do that, so I would like to be able to get in either Oblivion or Morrowind before Elder Scrolls 6. I just don't know whether that's going to be feasible or not. Oh, we're getting into the deep stuff now. John, do you believe that a modern advanced Western nation could collapse in a similar way to the Western Roman Empire? How would you foresee this happening, and what do you think the period that would come after, a modern Dark Age if you will, would look like? Interesting question, and it kind of depends on one thing for me, which is, if you just think about how society operates, and in particular, the population of the world right now, because if you kind of look at what we estimate the population of the world to be throughout history, population across the globe has hugely exploded over the past century or so. And a huge part of that are off the back of technological progress in some way. So in the form of medicine and electricity, refrigeration is a huge part of it, improvement in agricultural methods, trade, all sorts of good stuff. There's all sorts of reasons why in the last 100 years the population has skyrocketed to huge amounts. But the thing is, the population as it is right now can only be sustained as long as the things that we've built it on also remain. So the population in Western countries is what it is because we've got access to sewers and hospitals and electricity and food that's being imported from all over the world and diddly-diddly-dee. So at this point I guess you can kind of take two different views, a very utopian one or a very dystopian one. You could take the utopian view of saying, okay, we've made so much technological progress over the last 100 years, over the next 100 years, we're going to do the same thing again. So if the global population keeps growing, we'll keep finding more and more clever solutions to sort it out. In short, technology will keep advancing and staying ahead of population growth, so we'll all be absolutely fine. Or you can take a more dystopian view and say, okay, the problem is, this population growth has been built out of things that are not necessarily going to last forever. Some of the progress of the last century has been built on non-renewable resources and we're running out of them. And what happens when we do run out of them, or when they start becoming scarce and thus the prices start going up and availability starts going down? What happens if food becomes more expensive? What happens if fuel is a lot more expensive? What happens if Western nations can't import so much food because other nations won't export it to them because their growing populations mean they want to keep it for themselves? There's all sorts of reasons why you could choose to see the population in certain Western advanced economies as being artificially inflated by external factors that might not necessarily last forever. So I don't know which way things are going to go. Things could go either way in the long term. And maybe I think about this more than some people just because as someone who studies a lot of classical history, I've studied the history of systemic collapses, and thus I'm very keenly aware that up to this point, human history has ultimately been a series of cycles of people thinking they're the mightiest unassailable champions of their own destiny, collapsing in a surprisingly quick period of time, going back into a dark age of some description, and then re-emerging, and that just kind of keeps happening. So I'm perhaps more keenly aware than some people of the possibility that it could happen to us too. The idea that it couldn't happen to us would be sheer arrogance to the point of hubris. In fact, the point where societies think that couldn't possibly happen to us is pretty much the moment when it's most likely, because that's the point where the arrogance has got to the extent where no one's going to be planning for the worst case scenario because everyone just assumes it won't happen. So hopefully not. Hopefully technological progress will carry us forward and everything will be fine and we'll all live on the moon. But I don't know. I just don't know, and I do sometimes worry about it. John, I'm new to Paradox games and have always been a fan of Civilization. What would you recommend I start with in terms of Paradox? Crusader Kings 2 or Imperator Rome? I would actually recommend Stellaris. I think Stellaris is probably the most new player-friendly game Paradox has ever put out, and I've seen other people who've got more experience with Europa Universalis and Hearts of Iron saying a similar thing. I think Stellaris is very new player-friendly. So I'd say if you can, start with Stellaris, and then possibly consider Imperator Rome, because right now the game is not desperately complicated. I feel next to Crusader Kings 2, it's actually pretty simple, probably because it's at a much earlier stage of its development cycle. It's not been massively added onto yet, because Crusader Kings 2, even if you buy just the base game these days and not any DLC, you're not just buying the base game as it was when it came out, you're also buying a huge pile of free updates, as I was talking about earlier. So I think probably Imperator would be a good starting point if you're determined to go for a historical one. But if I had to suggest an order for you, yeah, probably I'd say Stellaris, Imperator, Crusader Kings 2 is probably not a bad one. Who are some of your and Claire's favourite science fiction authors, and which of their books are your all-time favourites? I don't necessarily read a huge amount of science fiction. I will say I have read some of The Culture by Ian M. Banks. I only started getting into it recently, but I have really been enjoying some of that. So I've only read a few of them so far, but I am planning to read more. So I'll say Ian M. Banks as The Culture, because that's really good stuff. I've really been enjoying that. Claire!
For sci-fi, I'm sure I'll surprise absolutely nobody when I say Ursula K. Le Guin. She's one of my favourite writers. My favourite book of hers is probably The Dispossessed, but all of her stuff is great. Blanket recommend all of her science fiction and all of her fantasy. I also absolutely love the Imperial Ratch books by Anne Leckie. That's the series that starts with Ancillary Justice, which is a book that won all of the awards a few years ago, and it is so good. The audiobook of that series is particularly superb. Definitely recommend that. Recently, I also reread Binti by Nnedi Okorafor, and I liked that one even more than the first time that I read it. I also just finished Record of a Spaceborne Few by Becky Chambers. This is the third book in her series that started with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, but it's kind of standalone. You could read it on its own, and it's super interesting. It's about the remnant of humanity, the last people of Earth, like living their life in space on massive generation ships, and it's really pretty great.
Do you ever worry about donations and the financial health of those donating it? I do somewhat, and it is something that's a bit interesting and difficult to kind of get your head around in terms of just like the culture around streaming. Because the thing is, ultimately, we've got no right to say to people, hey, you can or can't use your money for certain things. If people choose to use their money for certain things, then I don't think it would be fair to try and like stop them from doing it. Like, I think the best thing we can do in terms of our responsibility as running a channel that does live streams where donations are open is not to engage in any form of manipulative behavior, like saying, hey, we'll do this really awesome level if we get this many donations this month, or having any form of like donation tracker where there's any form of like, you know, rewards for totals or anything of that nature. In fact, one way I actually try and go a little bit beyond that in some ways, beyond what actually YouTube and Twitch do, is YouTube and Twitch do actually kind of give greater prominence to higher levels of donation. So on Twitch and on YouTube, if you kind of donate more, then your donation and message like stick around at the top of the chat for longer. And I can understand why they do that, it makes sense. But I try not to, this is really difficult to phrase, sorry, I'm really struggling to kind of construct my thoughts on this one. I try not to go like too much further in my reaction to bigger donations than smaller donations, because I don't want to provide any form of, say, stimulus or incentive for people to donate more than they're comfortable with because they'd rather get one reaction than another, if you see what I mean. I've probably explained that really badly, but I kind of think that like the best thing we can do is just be responsible. Don't use any form of like trackers or targets or incentives or anything like that. Like, you know, those things get used during charity live streams, and that's a really good thing, and it's a really good cause. So you get like donation incentives constantly in awesome games done quick and stuff like that, and that's great. In a charity live stream, absolutely. If we ever hosted a charity live stream, we would absolutely do that because it's for a good cause. But when it's for yourself, I would definitely not be comfortable doing that sort of thing. So, like, I think I hold two positions, which is we have to try and be responsible as far as we can, but equally, we don't really have the right to go telling people what to do with their money. So I think as long as we stick to those two positions, hopefully, people think we've got the balance right. John, Turkish Delights or American marshmallows? Oh, Turkish Delights. I do enjoy Turkish Delight. They're a bit rich and I can't have too much of them, but I do enjoy them. American marshmallows, I'm just not 100% a fan of. John, you seem to be on good terms with IO and Paradox. Ever thought of asking for a tour of their studios, given they're relatively close by in Europe? We probably could do, though actually IO I'm not so sure about. IO are fine with us, we've never had any problem with them, but I'm not sure we really know anyone inside IO. I'd say, if anything, we know Creative Assembly and the people inside there much better than we do the people inside IO. And Creative Assembly, I have been to their house on multiple occasions, because plenty of times early on in development, they won't actually send out code I can play on my computer. If I want to record something for a new Total War game, I need to go round to their place, which is fine. It's not too far away, it's in the UK, it's absolutely no problem whatsoever. Paradox, I have been invited to the Paradox convention a couple of times. In fact, I was invited specifically for that Stellaris YouTuber war, for both wars, actually. But I politely declined because the format involved a lot of face cam and stuff, so wasn't really my sort of thing. But yeah, I actually would not be surprised at all if at some point I end up going over to Paradox. But mostly so far I haven't had to, because they've been very good at just sending me code as long as I've been willing to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, before they send it. What's the funniest unscripted moment you've ever had while playing video games? It's probably actually the one you actually flagged in your own question, which is, nothing will ever top the Skyrim survival mode livestream, where completely by random chance, after of course we killed Benor in the Skyrim run, we wanted to make it up to Benor by marrying him, and then I got shanked by mercenaries on the morning of my wedding on my way to the church, just after Benor slightly suspiciously stepped outside. That was just so incredible and perfect, and nothing will ever beat that moment. It was beautiful. What do you like to eat for breakfast? Oh, Claire's not going to enjoy editing this. So, I like having a nice, simple, healthy breakfast to set me up for the day, which Claire considers absolutely disgusting, which is, I just sit down with a big bowl of Shreddies and a cup of tea, and that's it. That's all I want. I just want a massive bowl of Shreddies for cereal, cup of tea, and I'm done. And Claire does not like Shreddies. She thinks they're terrible. And they are kind of terrible, but they're good for you, damn it, so I have them anyway. John, who are your most and least favourite factions so far in Imperator Rome? My favourite faction so far is actually Ellis, because I did pick them out because I thought it would be an exciting playthrough, and I've been pretty happy with how it's been going so far, so that's worked out pretty well. My least favourite faction is actually Byzantium, who were one of the candidates I was considering playing as during my main series, but every time I did a playthrough, it was not a fun experience, because I either got completely steamrolled by Thrace, or I got completely steamrolled by Phrygia. Basically, I just couldn't find anywhere to expand to, I couldn't survive, and I got absolutely annihilated sooner or later. Though, weirdly, the AI seems to have an easier time of it. They don't seem to be able to expand, just like I couldn't, but they also don't seem to get steamrolled as much. So I'm not sure if the AI is a bit more aggressive towards players than it is towards other AI, but for some reason, AI Byzantium seems to do a better job not being steamrolled than me. John, how many other YouTubers have you actually met in person? Ooh, not many. I've met Matophobia many times. I like Matt, obviously. I've met Dan once. Only once? I think just once. I have actually been to YouTube's official Christmas party at the YouTube space. It was awful and I would never go again. But presumably the room was actually full of YouTubers. I just didn't recognise any of them. By an odd coincidence, I have actually met Larry Bundy Jr. He was actually at EGX at the same time as me at one point, so I have met him. I'm trying to think of anyone else right now, because I've never actually met Up Is Not Jump in person. I've never met the Spiffing Brit in person. Yeah, I think that might actually be it, to be honest, I'm afraid. Do you know the YouTuber Ashens? Yeah, it's a good channel. It's very well put together. There's some really good stuff on that. And had he asked me to star in his new film, would I have accepted the offer? Probably not, because I don't think I'd have done a particularly good job in it, because I've never been a particularly good actor in any way whatsoever. You know what? I'd have sent Claire in my place, because Claire did some theatre when she was younger and was very good in it, I'm sure. So Claire can go in my place and handle all the acting for me. And if Creative Assembly were to ask you to do tutorials in the future for Total War, would you consider it just like you did with Imperator? I would certainly consider it. As I say, I'm not going to seek it out, but if I was approached to do something similar, I would certainly consider it. Okay, fuck, marry, kill, fuck, marry, and kill. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to marry fuck, because then that's going to be an exciting marriage, isn't it? And then I'm going to fuck kill, because that just sounds like an experience, which means I'm therefore going to kill marry, because honestly it's a bit of an outdated institution. Do we really need marriage in this day and age? There we go, perfect. What sort of collections do you and Claire have other than video games and books? I.e. mugs, board games. We do have a very healthy number of board games, including a lot of Euro board games, which are very expensive. Some of them are like £50-60 each. So when I actually calculated the value of our board game shelf for the purpose of contents insurance, there's over £1,000 worth of board games in our flat. So, that's a fairly large number of board games. We've got too many mugs. You're right, they don't even all fit in the cupboard. So we've got way too many mugs. I personally really like coasters. I will always buy a nice set of coasters if I see a nice set of coasters. So I wouldn't say I collect coasters, but to a casual observer it probably looks like I do. So, oh god, that's probably the nerdiest thing I've ever said. Yeah, basically I collect drinks coasters. And I'm so sorry. John, last Patroncast you talked about doing one of the Medieval 2 Total War expansion campaigns in the future. Any thoughts about which one? My favourites are the ones set in Britain and the Americas. So probably one of those two. I'm not so keen on the one set around Lithuania, and I find the one set in the Middle East a bit less interesting. So probably it would be the Americas at the top of my list, because I've done Thrones of Britannia, and the Britannia campaign is not wholly dissimilar to that, so yeah, probably the Americas is top of the list, just. John, if you could get paid to do a tutorial guide or walkthrough of any game past, present or future, what would it be and why? Ooh, I will go for Advance Wars, because I'm actually really damn good at Advance Wars. That would just be a good excuse for me to show it off. Plus any excuse to draw attention to Advance Wars and thus make a sequel more likely. And I mean a good sequel, not Days of Ruin, Nintendo. John, I was hoping you could give me some recommendations to get into Greek or Roman mythology. I know it's a vast subject, so I'm looking for some reference books on the topic. Now, I'm not sure if you might find this a bit on the dry side, but I find a really good entry point is Robert Graves' The Greek Myths, which is very wordy. It's very, very wordy, it's very comprehensive. I find it fascinating. I don't know if maybe you'd like to start with something a bit lighter, but I think it actually does make a good starting point, because it actually gives you a proper comprehensive view of all the different myths, and it's very rare to get a proper comprehensive view, so I personally like Robert Graves' take on this, but maybe borrow the book from a library first just to see if you like it. It might not be for everybody. John, do you like Warhammer 40k? I don't know, because I've got basically no experience of it whatsoever. My knowledge of Warhammer is pretty much exclusively the fantasy side of things from the Total War Warhammer games. Actually, in all fairness, Claire knows about this more than me, so I'm actually going to pass this over to Claire, because she knows more about Warhammer, because she's actually been into painting the figurines and stuff in the past. With a specific question, Claire, being, which faction do you support? Oh, I know the answer to this, Claire. I know the answer to this.
I don't have as much time as I would like for painting figurines and playing the game and all of that, but when I do, I am squarely in the camp of Tyranids. I don't actually know a lot of the fluff and the backstory and all of that, but you know what, if you're asking me who I support, where I'm gonna place my bet on who's gonna win a fight between the Tyranids and pretty much anybody else when the swarm shows up on a planet, I'm on the side of the Nids. Plus, honestly, the figurines are just cooler. I'm sorry. Your tanks are very pretty, Space Marines, but I have tentacles, and tentacles are just cooler. That's the rules.
John, following on from the Imperator business, has Paradox or any other publisher reached out to you for feedback around game quality or anything else, really? Paradox did actually, after we did the live streams and all of that business, they basically sent us a little just kind of Google Drive document where everyone that took part could make notes about stuff we liked, stuff we didn't, any bugs we found or whatever. So, I made sure to tell them, hey, salt doesn't work because the designated colour is the same as the background, so you physically can't see it if you actually try and see where salt is located. Stuff like that, and a bunch of other kind of comments, feedback, stuff that I found. The question does actually flag Bethesda specifically. As far as I can recall, they've never actually asked me for specific feedback, but I was told at one point that the Fallout 76 mega video was going to be circulated around Bethesda, though I can't be sure that did actually happen in the end, but I was told that was the plan. John, your channel has a lot of tightly edited videos, plus long unedited live streams. Do you think it might make sense to provide a middle ground, less edited and thus less labour intensive videos as well on the side? The thing is, I'm not sure that would ever really be on the side, because what would it be on the side of? Right now we do the live streams and the tightly edited videos, and they're very different things, and they might appeal to different people. But if we were to do longer, less edited stuff, like, what would that go alongside? Because we'd need to scrap something to make that fit in. We need to do either less live streams or less tightly edited videos. And honestly, I don't think I'd ever be happy with it. You see, in a live stream, if something goes wrong or I stumble over my words or cough or whatever, it's just part of the format, because that's just what happens in a live stream. In a tightly edited video, I would never allow that to stand. I'd re-record myself saying a sentence, I'd do things over, I'd make sure everything was perfect, and I'm quite the perfectionist when it comes to the videos on the main channel. I'd never be happy with lower quality videos where there's like awkward pauses and stuff being put up as videos. I think either I want there to be videos where they're really, really damn well put together, or there's live streams where whatever happens, happens and whatever. I think personally I wouldn't be happy with the sort of middle ground thing you're talking about there. You're right, it would actually take less labour to make because the editing would be much easier. In fact, you know, we could just skip editing and say, screw it, whatever is in there, go. But I'd never be happy with that because I wouldn't think it was good enough quality. John, if you had to choose being banned by Obsidian, banned by Bethesda, banned by Paradox and Creative Assembly, or banned by Claire, who would you choose? Oh, that's really difficult. That's really, really difficult. Because, ooh. I mean, I can't choose Paradox and Creative Assembly because both of them have really high levels of output. So, loads of games get produced right there. And I can't choose Claire because I like Claire. So therefore we've got Obsidian or Bethesda. And sure, right now Bethesda might be the logical option because I'm not really playing any Bethesda games at the minute because I haven't really gone back to Fallout 76 recently. I'm kind of waiting for there to be some bigger changes to it. So they might be logical right now, but in future, there's going to be more Fallout games that might be better than Fallout 76. Whereas Obsidian, though they're very talented, they're not producing anything right now that I think is absolutely a core franchise I completely adore and couldn't live without. So like, you know, Pillars of Eternity I'm sure is absolutely great, but it's not something I'd make a full series of, it's not something my audience is desperately interested in, though that might change with the Outer Worlds, so I guess I have to go with Obsidian. Even though they're probably the most talented group on the list, purely because I can't get myself banned by the people who literally own the rights to Fallout, or Paradox and Creative Assembly, or Claire. So it kind of just has to be Obsidian by default, as sad as that is. John, in your opinion, what was the most critical battle of the ancient world and why? Such a difficult one to pick, so difficult. Like, my first instinct was to say something out of the Punic Wars, but then I realised actually that would be a bad pick. Because the thing about the Punic Wars is, no matter how many times Rome lost, Rome just kept coming back, because that's just kind of how Rome was. So no single battle in the Punic Wars was conclusive, no single battle turned the tide. So I'm actually going to go back over to the Greek side here, and I'm going to say something out of Alexander the Great's campaign. Because like we were discussing earlier, Greeks versus Persians was a big thing in the formation of Greek culture that heavily influenced Italian culture, that heavily influences all of Europe. So this stuff is important for the formation of the world as we know it today. Which of course means that Alexander taking a Greek force and destroying the Persian Empire once and for all, and thus going on to Hellenize large parts of the world, that's hugely significant too. Even if the empire did fragment afterwards, the Hellenization of large parts of the world was still massively important. So if there's one battle I have to pick, I guess I'd go for the Battle of Issus. Just because that's the battle where Darius personally gets his arse handed to him, and it kind of feels like a bit of a sea change, the beginning of the end of Persian power. Alexander at that point is on the warpath, he's not going to stop, he's going to win, he's going to knock out Persia for good, which up to that point is not something that Greeks had really thought about as an option. They'd always been playing defensively. They were scared of the great king of Persia, and the constant threat of Persia invading Greece was a big factor in how Greeks operated. They couldn't really go and do anything anywhere else in the Mediterranean because if they left their homeland vulnerable, Persia could in theory come and attack. So the breaking of Persian power once and for all, and the subsequent conquest of Persia, you can't help but feel that that has a massive impact on the world, just in terms of the Greek culture and Greek religion that was spread in the territory that was conquered by Alexander the Great after that point, and the liberating effect that had on Greek culture back in Greece itself. With the removal of the threat of Persia, that opens up all sorts of opportunities for those guys too, so probably the Battle of Issus, just for the cultural fallout that came out of it. John, have you ever played any of the Stronghold games? I have not, but they've been often recommended to me, so at some point I will totally get onto that. And any helpful advice or tips for someone who wants to start studying classics or history in general with a focus on classics? Best thing you can do if you have the option at your school is study the languages, if only because many classics courses are partly linguistic, so you will need some form of ancient language for those. Now, there are absolutely classical historical courses that you can take where you don't need any language whatsoever, but they're heavily in demand. If you want to get a good place at a good college or university, the best thing you can do is study ancient languages, get in that way, and then just focus on history once you're actually there, because that'll open up a lot more opportunities and places that you can apply for. John, I loved your Alien Isolation video. Is there any chance you could bring back some more horror games, say Resident Evil 7? Oh no. No, never gonna happen. I find found camera footage stuff terrifying already, so not a chance in hell am I doing something that basically begins as interactive found camera footage. No, I am never playing Resident Evil 7. Not a chance in hell, you can't make me. What are your thoughts on Total War, but in space? Isn't that pretty much Star Wars Empire at War, which I should totally do a series on at some point? There will totally be a series of that sooner or later. Probably later rather than sooner, but at some point or another. But yeah, Empire at War is well regarded, why not? Which is better, Bethesda women or Paradox women? Well, they've both got problems. You see, Bethesda women often completely bug out on you and just fall through the floor. But Paradox women, they literally just send you the foot and the rest is released as DLC over the next 5 years. John, if you had to live in any other country in the world, what would it be? I've said it before and I'll say it again, Canada. Because I've actually got plenty of Canadian family, so that would definitely be where I'd be heading next. John, if the year were 1300 and you'd just been appointed as king of an absolute monarchy, what would your first move be? One, I'd summon the court historian or whatever, and ask him some questions, because 1300 is a period I am not desperately familiar with, so I'd probably need a quick refresher on the state of Europe right now, just so I knew what was going on. And secondly, I'd probably implement compulsory daily bathing for everybody, because personal hygiene back then wasn't great, so we'd probably try and sort that out. John, if you could turn historical figures into YouTubers, who do you think would have the best channel? Oh, Aristophanes. Not the librarian, the Greek comic playwright. I love his plays so much. I would love him as a modern day YouTuber. He'd be amazing. Who would be the most successful? Probably Plautus. He's like Aristophanes, but there are more dick jokes. And who do you think would have content most similar to yours? Herodotus, I'd like to think, because it's sort of history, but like, it's fun history, and also some of it's kind of total nonsense. John, a recommendation for you. Persona 5, a mix of social simulator and turn-based battles, but separated into long sections of social simulator and then long sections of combat. Honestly, that actually kind of puts me off it a bit, because the way I like putting together a video is, I like there being like, say, a bit of story and a bit of combat. That's how I kind of put together Fallout 2, for example. If you're saying that Persona 5 would be like, okay, here's 4 episodes of Social Simulator, and now here's 5 episodes of combat, and then here's another 3 episodes of Social Sim, that kind of doesn't work for me, because I like every video to have a bit of variety in it. You know, a bit of politics, a bit of war, a bit of roleplay stuff, if it's a total war game, something like that. So, I kind of feel like that wouldn't suit my style, to be honest. How is the Imperator Rome series doing and how are you enjoying it? So far, it's been doing pretty well. Views have been pretty good. There's not been a massive amount of drop-off. And I'm enjoying playing it. Absolutely, it could do with some improvements, but this won't be my only series of it. It'll be like Stellaris, where I want to play this version right now to get to grips with the basics, and then at some point we'll end it. And I don't think the Imperator series is going to be as long as Crusader Kings 2 was, because like Crusader Kings 2, there's no designated endpoint. You just kind of figure out where you want to end it. So at some point, I will wrap up the Imperator series when I feel like it's a good time, and then we'll wait for there to be some updates, some DLC, some diddly-diddly-dee, all of that good stuff, and then we'll come back to it and do a new series, just like we've done for Stellaris, where there's the initial playthrough, then there was the live streams, then there was Apocalypse, then there was Megacorp. So yeah, we've done 4 playthroughs of Stellaris. Imperator Rome will also make a few appearances, where it's not going to be a massive mega series. Maybe it'll be like 20-25 parts, then we'll have a gap, then we'll come back to it when there's new stuff and we pick up the new stuff specifically. John, why'd you go for the groin so much in older Fallouts? Because we're not allowed to do it anymore and it's hilarious. Yes, I'm aware going for the eyes is the best option because eyes gets ridiculous amounts of damage, but it's just kind of hilarious to shoot someone in the groin. John, have you ever heard of Total Annihilation Kingdoms, an old RTS set in the fantasy world? For some reason I have heard of it, but I can't place it. So I will look it up after the Patroncast, but no guarantees there because, yeah, getting old RTSs to run on modern computers can be a bit on the tricky side. John, I was wondering what got you interested in ancient history. Was it a game or television series? No, actually, when I started secondary school, when I was like 11 or 12 or whatever, I had to take Latin. That was just one of the things that you took in your first year at my school. And I really enjoyed it, and I was very good at it. And I started getting into the history after that point. So actually, I started getting into classics from the language and then working into the history after that point, which is probably not how most people go. John, what's your most favourite dessert? Oh, Bakewell tart. I love a good Bakewell tart. And what's your least favourite on top of that? Ooh, has to be cheesecake. Now, I should be clear, I find cheesecake very tasty. It does not agree with me. So, I stay away from cheesecake. It is not a good dessert for me. John, have you gone back and played any more Heaven's Vault? Not yet, but I am planning to. I'm really busy at the minute because Claire is not quite back off her vacation just yet, so I'm a bit overwhelmed at the moment, but when things settle down, I would like to play a bit more of that in my evenings, yes. John, if someone time travelled from the past, what do you think would freak them out most about modern society? Now, there's a few things I could say to this, but I want to actually raise one that just struck me a minute ago I thought was quite interesting, which is they'd probably be freaked out by light pollution, which is pretty much any town or city in the world today. If you look up at the sky, you can barely see the stars even on a clear night. But in the ancient world, where there was basically no light pollution, this was not a thing. They had an incredibly beautiful night sky where the stars were so much more vibrant because there was basically no light pollution whatsoever. So I imagine that would really freak them out. Their very first night in the future, they'd just be like, what the hell has happened to the night sky? What have you bastards done? So there's probably a lot that would freak them out, but that would certainly be one thing. Also, do you ever experience motion sickness while playing video games? Only under one scenario, and that's if I'm doing virtual reality stuff and I'm using a control system that means I move by pressing an analog stick. I cannot deal with it. For me, it has to be either blink teleportation or room scale movement. I cannot deal with analog stick movement in virtual reality. It just completely destroys my brain. John, when you studied classics at university, did you study much about the Roman regal period and the fall of the Roman monarchy? I'm afraid not. I'm not an expert in that area whatsoever, so you might well know better than me there. I was much more focused on the Hellenic world, and in terms of the Roman stuff, late Republic, early Imperial. So there's so much to study in this area. On my course in particular, you picked 8 modules that were fairly well focused, and I just didn't really study that period at all. John, do you think there's less John roleplay in any of your most recent videos? I don't think so, because I think actually Barbarian Invasion's been really good for that. So if that's what you're into, I would check out the Barbarian Invasion playthrough, because I think that might very much scratch that itch. John, what are your thoughts on Detective Pikachu and Sonic the Hedgehog? I've not seen either yet. In fact, is Detective Pikachu even out? I thought it had just been reviewed, but I'm not sure it's out in general release in the UK just yet. Detective Pikachu looks fun and weird, and honestly, I just applaud Nintendo for letting one of their intellectual properties do something a bit weird and risky. That looks interesting enough that I might well catch it at some point. Sonic the Hedgehog looks bad, but then I'm clearly not the target audience. It seems to be targeted at young kids, so not my thing, to be honest, no. And sadly, a question about the show Archer and whether I'd be interested in reading an essay that was just written by somebody about it. Sadly, neither me or Claire watch Archer, so I'm very sorry, but it would mean nothing to us. John, I just got a new job. Any sage advice? It's always safer to be overdressed than underdressed. On your first day, show up as fancy as you can and then just slowly lower the level of fancy until you're matching the rest of the office. But it's definitely a better idea to show up overdressed than underdressed. What's the most British thing you do on the channel, and why is it apologising to enemies when they take you by surprise? Honestly, it probably is that, yes. You're right. I don't even really mean to that. It's not a running joke or anything. It's just naturally say sorry to anybody, even if they're the ones that have just jumped out at me. With Pokemon, Sonic, and apparently Mega Man getting live-action movies, what other games would you like to see live-action or ultra-realistic style movies of? Make a Xenoblade Chronicles movie, you cowards. John, have you ever considered doing a Rome history series where you play games set in ancient Rome and just go all out on history lectures? I've considered something similar, but not quite the same, which is, if I were to ever do something like that, I wouldn't be playing a game at the same time. It would straight up be light-hearted, entertaining lecture style with whatever's appropriate to be on screen at the time. I don't know, art or something that supports whatever I'm saying at the time. And I probably wouldn't do it about Roman history. I'd probably do it about Greek mythology. I would love to do a complete guide to the entire corpus of Greek mythology, including all the stupid stories that contradict the other stupid stories, like from the beginning of time through to the early myths, the Trojan War, the stuff after, all of it, because some of that stuff is absolutely bananas. But it would be a huge amount of time and work, and I don't know whether people would really be keen on it, and new people that arrive for that, would they stick around for the normal stuff? So I don't know when or if I'll ever do that, but I would like to do that sort of thing, yes. Also, are there any books you'd recommend for learning Roman history? It's a very big topic and no book's going to cover all of it. I find a very readable, accessible starting point would be SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard, which I read fairly recently, and while it's a little bit light on detail, it's accessible and it's fun and it keeps the pace going, so it's not a bad introduction. How many views would a video have to get to make it worth you not enjoying making it? I'm not sure that would be a thing, to be honest. Like, the big video essays, I really enjoy putting them together. They're really interesting to script and put together, though I'm often exhausted by the end of it. Honestly, because ad revenue barely even matters anymore, Patreon's so much more important, that kind of doesn't hugely matter. The reason why I sometimes cull a series if it's doing really bad in views is nothing to do with ad revenue anymore. It's just to do with the fact that the community clearly isn't enjoying it, and thus it's taking up space where we could put something that more people would enjoy. So kind of the logic has changed fairly significantly there, because back in the early days of the channel, we culled underperforming series because it just wasn't worth it in terms of ad revenue. These days, that's pretty much entirely unimportant. So yeah, the logic has totally changed. That's not really a consideration I'd make anymore, and if I'm not going to enjoy making something, I'm not going to make it, even if it's something that probably would get decent views. Hence Red Dead Redemption 2, which totally would get decent enough views, but I just wouldn't enjoy putting it together, so therefore it's not going to happen. John, if there ever were a Fallout game in Great Britain, what do you think would be an interesting location or a possible plot? I feel like it would have to be based somehow around London, but as is kind of like in Britain, this idea of everybody hating London and London hating everybody else, I think you'd kind of have to lean into that in some way. Like, say, you know, we could say London declared independence because it didn't want anything to do with all of the scabby wastelanders outside of it. So, like, the M25's been replaced with a moat of acid, which nobody can cross, and there's this one crossing point, but it's guarded by huge numbers of really tough guys, and only some people are allowed in, and, like, you know, the first act of the game is getting access to London from the outside, so you need to, like, you know, become a trader, or murder a trader and steal their stuff, or bribe someone, or diddly-diddly-dee, and it's all very RPG-ish and very open-ended, and there's loads of ways you can enter London, and then you enter London itself, and then inside London you find, oh no, this utopia is actually a nightmare, and diddly-diddly-dee, and things go wrong, and the third act is figuring out what to do with London going forward. There we go, there's the plot for you, Bethesda, you're welcome. John, your poor Australian fans are currently suffering for an election campaign. Please take pity on us and do a happy chill stream on the weekend of 18th of May. Ooh, I've got a plan for the 18th of May. I think you're actually going to be pretty happy with what I've got planned. No spoilers, but I do have something special for that weekend, yes. John, are you still planning to play XCOM 2? Yes, but I don't know when. It's probably not for a while. There's a few things I'd rather do ahead of that. John, have you read Stephen Fry's Mythos and Heroes? I haven't actually. I've heard somewhat mixed things, so I never actually bothered, I'm afraid, so I can't really comment on them, sorry. Do you think the Sonic movie will fare better or worse than the 1993 Mario Brothers movie? You see, the thing is, I think the Mario Brothers movie is strangely compelling because though it's bad, it's so bloody weird, it's sort of compelling anyway. Sonic just kind of looks like it's bad in the boring, terrible, badly put together sort of way. Like Transformers 1 levels of bad. So I feel like Mario Brothers will still be the more interesting movie to rewatch just for the utter bananasness of it. Fuck, marry, kill, Soda Mascot Edition. So, Coca-Cola Santa, Pepsi Man, or the Mountain Dew Hillbilly guy who's apparently their logo. I need to look him up because we don't really have him in the UK. So, I guess we have to marry Coca-Cola Santa because Santa seems like a nice guy, and there's got to be some presents to be got out of that, because that's got to be you guaranteed on the nice list for the rest of time. Pepsi Man has to die, because Pepsi Man is an abomination, and I'd be doing the world a favour, so therefore by default, I'm going to fuck the Mountain Dew Hillbilly guy. I won't necessarily enjoy it, but Pepsi Man must die. John, with Total War 3 Kingdoms coming out soon, have you played any other Romance of the Three Kingdoms games like Dynasty Warriors? I have never played a single Dynasty Warriors. but I have started doing some reading around the Three Kingdoms, so I'll hopefully know what I'm talking about by the time it comes out. John, following the Paradox event, are you more or less interested in doing more future multiplayer games on stream? Potentially more. I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I had fun with it. You know, it was a bit difficult with all the technical problems that we had, but it was still fun. So I wouldn't say I'm like hugely interested, but I'd say I'm more than I was beforehand. John, how's the AI in Total War 3 Kingdoms? Has it improved a lot, or does it still make the same old weird decisions? It seems pretty good, because now it seems to be informed by the trait system, so if nothing else, it seems more predictable. Well, actually, are we talking about micro or macro AI? Like, if you're talking about do people act intelligently during the campaign, yes, that seems to be pretty good, because that's predictable because of the trait system. If you're talking about in battle, I probably haven't played enough to say, but it seems to be mostly pretty competent from what I have seen. So, about the Oblivion and Pokemon playthroughs, any updates? None whatsoever, but Pokemon will probably come first, because if I can squeeze something in ahead of the new ones later this year, that would be perfect. John, if Bethesda made a free-to-play option for Fallout 76 where you spawned in as a raider to raider camp, how would you make that work? That could not be made to work, because the only way that really works is by saying these guys are now the enemies of established paying players. And at that point, you are just letting in griefers for free who have the specific goal of causing trouble for everybody else. Like, you could try and disadvantage them by saying that they don't have anyone on their map, but they will always show up on everybody else's map. But in general, this is a terrible, terrible idea, because it would just ruin the experience for the people who've actually bought the game, and I don't think the free-to-play players are going to actually have a particularly good time with it either. So I really hope Bethesda doesn't go down that route. Like, if they want to go free-to-play, fine, make the game free-to-play. Arguably, it would have gone down better if it was free-to-play from the beginning. And with the Atomic Store in from day one, that might have made a lot more sense. But yeah, I'm not sure that could be made to work. I just think it's too much of a fundamentally problematic idea, just because it is effectively saying, welcome griefers, come on in, welcome aboard, you don't have to pay, just come and ruin everybody else's fun. John, have you read Early Riser, Jasper Ford's latest novel? I have not. I have been meaning to. I did see that was out a little while ago, but I never actually got around to ordering it, so I will totally read that at some point, but I have not as yet, though I've read pretty much everything else Jasper Ford has written, because I just love him. I think he's great. If you could have any one of the Infinity Stones without any negative repercussions, which would you choose? I'd probably go for interesting. Probably the Space Stone, just because teleportation wherever I want sounds really cool. That just seems really, really damn cool, because that's effectively the same as super speed as a superpower, and I've always thought super speed was like the best superpower, so the Space Stone is basically that. Does it bother you when people frequently ask about the same games such as Dragon Age? Not really, it's perfectly understandable. Some games are very popular and have particularly fanatical fan bases. It's natural they're going to agitate in favour of their favourite games, so it just comes with the territory. It doesn't bother me at all. Another recommendation, Plague Inc. Evolved, which I'm vaguely familiar with. I know a bit about that. I've never played it, but I do know a little bit about it. I agree it would make a good video at some point or another, I don't know when. I've seen plenty of talk about Imperator Rome, comparing it to Crusader Kings 2, and saying plenty of elements are like Crusader Kings 2 Lite. Would you agree with that? I can't comment because I know for a fact from a lot of chatter and comments that there are a lot of similarities with Europa Universalis 4, which I'm not familiar with at all. So I can't really comment on what it's most like because there are gaps in my Paradox knowledge, but my understanding was the similarities are most close to Europa Universalis, not Crusader Kings. Any chance of some more RPG full series on the channel at some point? Feels a bit grand strategy heavy at the minute. You're right, but that's just because of accidents of release schedules. So we've had Imperator and we're about to have Three Kingdoms. So that's just kind of how that shook out by accident. But we will absolutely have some more RPG stuff going forward. I'd like to fit in some Pokemon before the new Pokemon games come in. Whenever the new Bloodlines game comes out, I want to actually get the original in before that too. So that's a good, well-regarded RPG. So absolutely there will be some more RPGs coming, yes. John, have you ever had potato aim and gotten wrecked? Yes, pretty much every time I play any form of online shooter, I do indeed have some serious potato aim and I do get wrecked. Oh no, a science experiment has gone wrong and turned you, Claire and Tabby into Pokemon. What kind of Pokemon have you all become? Tabby has become a Snorlax because she likes sleeping 23 hours a day, only getting up to eat, so Tabby's a Snorlax. Claire, I think, is a Swadloon because it's the Pokemon that more than any other likes wrapping itself up in blankets, which Claire likes doing. She likes forming a little cocoon of quilts and whatever because she likes to stay nice and toasty, which I feel like Swadloon does. So Claire's a Swadloon. And Claire does tell me I am sometimes unbearably hyperactive in the mornings, given Claire is not a morning person. So I'm going to go for Vigoroth for me, because Vigoroths can't stay still for one moment. They always have to be doing something. And that's kind of a flaw of mine too. I'm incapable of taking any time off. I just keep working on this or other projects, or in general I'm very bad at relaxing and taking time off. So I'm going to say that. John and Claire, what was the most surprising thing that you learnt about the other when you moved in together? I've been racking my brains for a few minutes. I can't actually think of anything that took me massively by surprise when I moved in with Claire. But I will add one thing that's kind of tangentially the same question, which is, I feel like I may have been slightly bamboozled on the question of Tabby, which is, Tabby was sold to me, if you like, as a short-haired cat. And as a short-haired cat, she won't be leaving fur everywhere. Absolutely not. No, she's a short-haired cat, so there's not going to be fur everywhere, John. Where does the fur come from, Claire? Where does all this fur that moves around the apartment in tiny, furry tumbleweeds come from? Because I think it comes from the cat. Anyway, over to Claire, because I imagine I came with all sorts of unpleasant surprises.
Now, for the record, I never said to John that Tabby would not shed because she is a short-haired cat. I just said she's a short-haired cat, which she is, and she will shed less than a long-haired cat, which she does. She still sheds. She's a pet. That is, like, what they do. I mean, I don't know what he was expecting, really. Now, in terms of what surprised me about living with John when we moved in together for the first time, I also had to rack my brain a little bit because it's been a while. Like, we've been living together for about 6 or 7 years now, something like that. So, I guess what surprised me the most, or what is like a delightful feature of living with John, which I had not necessarily anticipated, is that John makes a lot of, like, adorable noises in the morning. Like, he will wake up and yawn and stretch and, like, just make puppy sounds. It's adorable. What can I say? It's very, very, very cute. Also, he sings in the shower and whistles a lot. The whistling is kind of annoying. But apart from the whistling, it's very cute.
Also, do you think another end card stream would be possible? I know it was inefficient, but it was very entertaining. Never say never, but I don't plan to do one anytime soon. Maybe I'll do one on a special occasion or something, but as we've actually missed a few live streams recently, I'd rather focus on just doing some fun one-off games for a bit first. And one more, any chance of hoodies? I don't know. As I say, we're a bit busy and massively behind and overworked at the minute. At some point when we get back under control, I will try and reopen the hoodie project. And finally, and most importantly of all, with May 27th coming up, do you know what you're doing for the 6th anniversary of Many a True Nerd? I don't for certain, but I have a few things in mind, and they are all spectacular. And I'm not saying, because that would be spoilers, ladies and gentlemen. You're just going to have to wait and see, but it's good stuff, alright? It's going to be amazing. And there we are, ladies and gentlemen. That is the end of Patroncast Part 2, the grand finale, Endgame. I am sorry this got split up from the first part and we had to stag this over a few days. It's just been a bit crazy, as someone did specifically point out in the questions. It's just been because there have been so many one-offs and specials this last couple of months. It's been too much. It's been basically me taking on more work than I should have done because I'm just like that. It's a flaw of mine. So hopefully we can get back to normal. By next month, everything will be as it should be. Claire will be back. We can get things back onto our usual timetable. And maybe I could even have a day off at some point. Who flipping knows? Thank you all so very, very much for joining me in the second part, the grand finale of the Patroncast. And thank you all so very, very much in general, because without Patroncast, I don't know what we'd be doing. I genuinely don't know. It keeps us going. It provides us with the security to do this. And just the fact that there are so many people always asking these questions and checking out the Patroncast every month, it is genuinely humbling to me. So thank you all so very, very much. Hopefully, I will see you in the next Patroncast too. But in the meantime, I've been John. This has been Many a True Nerd. And this has been the April Not Even Remotely 2019 Patroncast. Thank you very much, and goodbye.